Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share for more billionaire stories like this one. The first time Elara Vance walked into the towering glass atrium of Vance Tower, she was dripping wet. A freak summer storm had torn through the city 5 minutes before her interview, and her carefully chosen thrift store blazer had been no match for it. She stood there, a tiny island of shabby fabric on a sea of polished marble, water pooling around her second-hand loafers. She was a scholarship kid, a programmer who'd built a revolutionary logistics algorithm in her university's basement server room. This interview was her Hail Mary. If she didn't get this job, she'd be packing her bags to go back to the Rust Belt town she'd fought so hard to escape. The elevator ride to the 80th floor felt like ascending to another planet. The doors opened to a penthouse office that was less a workspace and more a monument to ego. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a city sprawled beneath a bruised purple sky, and standing in front of them, silhouetted against the fading light, was Alexander Vance. He was younger than the tabloids made him look. The billionaire tech mogul, the genius who'd turned a dorm room app into a global empire by the age of 29. He was famously reclusive, famously ruthless, and, as he turned around, infuriatingly handsome. He had the sharp, angular features of a classical statue and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He didn't offer a hand. "You're late," he said, his voice flat. He glanced at her damp clothes, his lip curling almost imperceptibly, and disheveled. Elara felt a hot spike of defiance. She'd spent 4 years being overlooked, being the charity case in a world of legacy students. She was done shrinking. "The storm," she said, holding his gaze. "But my algorithm doesn't care about the weather. It's 17% more efficient than your current system, and it uses 40% less server load. I can show you the numbers, or we can keep discussing my wardrobe." A flicker of surprise crossed his face before it returned to a mask of cool indifference. He gestured to a chair. "Show me." For the next hour she did. She projected her work onto his wall, her voice steady and clear, dismantling his company's inefficiencies with the cold precision of a surgeon. When she finished, the silence was heavy. Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're arrogant." "I'm accurate," she shot back. "There's a difference." He stood up, walking to the window with his back to her. "The position is yours. You'll report directly to me. My last CTO couldn't keep up." "Don't make the same mistake." He paused. "And, Elara, get a new blazer." And so began the most intoxicating and infuriating chapter of her life. It wasn't a typical workplace romance. There were no grand gestures, no flowers. Their connection was forged in war rooms during all-nighters before product launches, in the shared silence of a private jet as they flew to crisis-manage a server outage in another country, in the quiet, electric tension of two minds that worked at the same impossible speed. He'd push her, challenge her, make her defend every line of code, every decision, and she'd stand her ground, refusing to be cowed by his billions or his reputation. She was the only person who ever called him Alex to his face, and the way his jaw tightened every time she did it sent a thrill down her spine. The turning point came during the launch of their most ambitious project yet, a satellite network designed to bring high-speed internet to the most remote corners of the world. The night before the global press conference, they were alone in the command center, monitors casting a pale blue glow on their faces. The pressure was astronomical. One wrong move could tank the company's stock. "You're going to change the world tomorrow," she said softly, handing him a cup of coffee. He took it, his fingers brushing hers. A jolt, like a static shock, passed between them. He looked at her then, really looked, and the mask of the cold billionaire slipped for the first time. She saw the exhaustion, the loneliness, the weight of a world he'd built on his shoulders. "We are going to change the world," he corrected, his voice a low murmur. He reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "I couldn't have done this without you, Elara. Any of it." The kiss that followed wasn't a firework explosion. It was a quiet, inevitable pull, like a planet finally falling into its sun. It was the culmination of months of intellectual sparring, of silent understandings, of building something together that was bigger than either of them. For 6 months, they were a secret. Hidden dinners in his penthouse, stolen weekends at his estate upstate. It was a fairy tale. The poor girl and the billionaire. The media, when they finally found out, went into a frenzy. The scullery maid and the king of tech. One headline screamed. They painted her as a gold digger, a social climber who'd slept her way to the top. It stung, but Alexander's unwavering support was her shield. He was changing, too. She saw the reclusive tycoon start to trust, to open up. He told her about his father, a man who measured love in profit margins, who'd cut him off when he dropped out of Stanford to start his company. He told me I'd be a failure, Alexander confessed one night, that the only thing that mattered was the bottom line. I spent 10 years proving him wrong. Alara saw the wounded boy beneath the billionaire's armor, and she loved him for it. She began to believe in a future with him. The night he proposed was simple. No skywriting, no paparazzi, just the two of them on the rooftop of Vance Tower, the city lights glittering below. He got down on one knee, a modest, elegant ring in his hand, his eyes holding a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "Elara," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you're the only person who ever saw me. Not the money, not the company, just me. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times. Yes. The engagement was supposed to be the happiest time of her life. But that's when the cracks began to show. Subtle at first, he became distant, consumed by a new, mysterious acquisition. He started missing dinners, canceling weekend trips. His phone was a constant, buzzing companion. Then came the prenuptial agreement. It was presented to her by his lead counsel, a formidable woman named Miss Hart, in a sterile conference room. It was a thick, intimidating document. Elara, who had signed nothing but lease agreements and student loan documents in her life, felt a chill run down her spine. She took it to Alexander. "It's just a formality," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Standard procedure. My lawyers are paranoid." She read it, every word. It wasn't just about protecting his fortune. It had a non-disclosure clause, so ironclad it would effectively silence her for life. A non-compete clause that would prevent her from ever working in her field again if they divorced. And a clause that, in the event of an incompatibility of lifestyle, would leave her with nothing but a small, insulting lump sum. "This isn't a prenup, Alex," she said, her voice shaking. "This is a muzzle. This is a cage." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Hilara, you don't understand how this world works. People get ugly. This is to protect the company, to protect us, to protect you," she corrected, her heart cracking. "I thought we were building an us." The argument was the worst they'd ever had. He fell back on the language of his father, talking about assets, liabilities, and risk management. She heard the echo of the cold man she'd first met in this very building. In that moment, the fairy tale shattered. She saw the truth. He was a billionaire, and she was a line item. No matter how much he loved her, the empire would always come first. She called off the engagement. The silence that followed was deafening. She quit her job, packed her meager belongings, and moved out of the apartment he'd bought for her. She retreated to a small studio in a different part of the city, nursing her broken heart and a simmering rage she'd never known she possessed. For 3 months, she didn't see or speak to him. She watched from afar as Vance Enterprises announced its mysterious new acquisition, a massive, struggling social media conglomerate called Lyra. The tech world was baffled. It seemed like an archaic, illogical move for a company focused on infrastructure. Analysts called it Vance's folly. But Alara, sitting in her tiny studio, her laptop open, began to see a pattern she didn't like. Lyra's value wasn't in its platform. It was in its data. Deep, psychographic data on nearly 2 billion users. Data that, in the wrong hands, could be weaponized. Data that could be used to predict, manipulate, and control. Her anger crystallized into a mission. Using the skills he'd honed working for Alexander, she began to dig. It took weeks of sleepless nights, of navigating layers of encrypted firewalls and shell companies. She used backdoors she'd built into the Vance system during her tenure, backdoors she'd never told anyone about, a programmer's insurance policy. What she found was far worse than corporate greed. It was a blueprint. A deal Alexander had been negotiating for months, the very deal that had torn them apart. He wasn't just buying Lyra. He was building a new global surveillance architecture, one that would be sold to authoritarian governments. It was a project, codenamed Gorgon. The same satellite network she had helped him build to connect the world was being retrofitted to monitor it. The man who wanted to change the world had decided to control it instead. The evidence was damning. Emails, encrypted voice transcripts, financial trails leading to offshore accounts. Her heart turned to stone in her chest. The man she loved wasn't just a ruthless businessman, he was a monster. She realized the prenup wasn't just about money, it was about ensuring that if she ever found out, she could never tell anyone. She knew what she had to do. It wasn't just about revenge for their broken engagement. It was about stopping him. The annual Vance Enterprises Gala was the event of the season, a glittering affair held in a museum that Alexander had donated a wing to. It was the one night he was guaranteed to be in public, surrounded by the world's press. Ilara wore a simple black dress, a far cry from the designer gowns she'd worn as his fiancée. She'd sold the ring and used the money to rent the space. She walked in not as a guest, but as a specter from his past. She saw him across the room, a glass of champagne in his hand, laughing with a senator. He looked up, and their eyes met. His face went pale. He started moving towards her, a look of confusion, and, she noted with a bitter satisfaction, fear. She didn't wait for him. She walked past him, towards the stage where a string quartet was playing. She walked up the steps, her heels clicking on the polished wood. The music faltered. A hush fell over the crowd. A security guard started to move, but Alexander held up a hand, stopping him. He was frozen, watching her, his expression unreadable. Ilara approached the microphone. She pulled a small USB drive from her clutch, holding it up for everyone to see. Her hand wasn't shaking. She felt a terrifying, absolute calm. "Good evening," she said, her voice amplified through the museum's grand hall. "My name is Ilara Vance. Some of you know me as the former CTO of Vance Enterprises, or as Alexander's ex-fiancée."
Have you subscribed yet? Don't miss out on more billionaire stories like this one. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed. "I'm not here tonight to talk about a broken engagement," she continued, her gaze locking onto Alexander's. He stood perfectly still, a predator caught in the headlights. "I'm here to expose the truth about the man you all revere, about the deal he's been hiding. Project Gorgon." She held up the USB drive. "On this drive is irrefutable evidence. It shows that Alexander Vance is not building a future of global connection. He is building a global surveillance state. He is weaponizing the satellites we built together. He is planning to sell your privacy, your security, and your freedom to the highest bidder." The room erupted. Journalists surged forward, shouting questions. Socialites gasped. The carefully constructed facade of the evening crumbled into chaos. Alexander finally moved. He walked towards the stage, his face a mask of controlled fury. She expected him to yell, to deny, to have his security tackle her. Instead, he climbed the steps, walked calmly to the microphone, and gently took the USB drive from her fingers. He looked at the crowd, then back at her. For a long, agonizing moment, he just stared. Then, he turned to the microphone. His voice, when it came, was clear and steady, cutting through the pandemonium. She's right. The silence that fell was more absolute than before. Even Ilara froze. Alexander let out a long, slow breath. The tension drained from his shoulders. Everything Ilara has said is true. Project Gorgon exists. For the last year, I have been negotiating a deal to build a surveillance infrastructure that would have been sold to regimes with appalling human rights records. He turned to face her, and the look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was relief. A profound, soul-deep relief. "Ilara," he said, speaking only to her now, his voice raw. "I was going to do it. I was so consumed by my father's voice in my head, by the need to prove I was the most powerful person in the room, that I lost myself. I was 10 days away from signing the final contract." He held up the USB drive, but I couldn't. I realized I'd rather lose everything, the company, my reputation, all of it, than become the man my father wanted me to be. The man I was becoming. His jaw tightened. "This drive, it's the only copy. I've had it for 3 weeks. I was going to hand it over to the New York Times myself tomorrow morning." A collective gasp went through the room. He gestured to a woman in the crowd. A senior editor from the Times stepped forward, her face a mask of professional shock, holding up her phone. "Mr. Vance, our office just received a data package from you 20 minutes ago. We thought it was a hoax." He nodded slowly. "It wasn't." He turned back to Ilara, his eyes glistening. "I knew you were the only one who could force my hand, the only one who would find it, the only one who would have the courage to stop me. I left the trail for you, Ilara. I built it using the security flaws I knew you'd remember. Every single breadcrumb." Ilara's mind reeled. The encrypted firewalls that had been just a little too easy to bypass. The paper trail that had been almost too perfect. The back doors she'd thought were her secret. He'd known. He'd known all along. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why wouldn't you just tell me?" "Because I was a coward," he said, the billionaire's mask gone, revealing the man she'd fallen in love with, the man she'd thought she'd lost. "I was ashamed. I got so lost in the darkness that I didn't think I deserved to be pulled back into the light. I pushed you away with that prenup because I was testing you, trying to see if you'd fight for me, or if you'd just walk away. It was the most pathetic, stupid thing I've ever done. You deserved better. You deserve the truth." He took a step closer. The cameras were a frenzy, the crowd a blur. But for them, there was only each other. "You broke my heart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It woke me up. I started dismantling the deal the day after you left. It took months. I had to be careful. They are dangerous people, Ilara. I had to create a smokescreen, make them think I was still on board, while I gathered the evidence to destroy them and myself." He held the USB drive out to her. "This was my confession. I was going to do it alone, but then I saw you walk in tonight, and I knew. I knew I couldn't do it without you. I never could." The editor from the Times was now on stage, flanked by 2 other journalists, asking rapid-fire questions. Security was forming a perimeter around them. The story of the decade was unfolding in real time. Ilara looked from the USB drive in Alexander's hand to his face. She saw the truth there. Not the billionaire, not the genius, just Alex. The flawed, brilliant, broken man who had been willing to burn his entire empire to the ground to do the right thing. Who had orchestrated his own takedown, using the woman he loved as the only weapon he trusted. The twist wasn't that he was a villain. It was that he had built his own downfall to become the man she deserved. She took the USB drive. Then, in front of the world's press, she took his hand. "You're an idiot," she said, tears mixing with a laugh of disbelief. "I know," he replied, a ghost of his old smirk returning. "But I'm trying to be better." The next morning, the story wasn't just about a billionaire's fall from grace. It was about a man who, when faced with the ultimate choice, chose his soul over his empire. It was about a woman who had the courage to expose the truth, only to discover that the truth was far more complicated and far more redemptive than she ever imagined. They didn't get back together overnight. There was too much pain, too much betrayal. But they faced the legal battles, the federal investigations, and the media circus side by side. Vance Enterprises was broken up. The satellite network was handed over to an international consortium for genuine humanitarian use, and Alexander Vance, stripped of his fortune and his company, faced the consequences of his actions with a quiet dignity that surprised everyone. The last scene wasn't in a penthouse or a courtroom. It was on a small rocky beach in Maine, a year later. Elara was running a small nonprofit that taught coding to underprivileged kids. Alexander was working as a consultant for ethical tech startups, making a fraction of what he used to, but sleeping better than he ever had in his life. He walked up to her as she was packing up her gear. He was wearing a worn-out jacket, his hair ruffled by the wind. He looked nothing like the man in the silhouette from the 80th floor. "I got you something," he said, handing her a small box. She opened it cautiously. Inside was a simple, hand-forged silver ring. "There's no prenup," he said, his voice earnest. "There's no company. There's no empire. There's just me, a guy who's trying to be worthy of the incredible woman he loves." She looked at the ring, then at him. The ocean roared behind them. The sun broke through the clouds. She smiled, the same defiant, brilliant smile she'd given him on the day they met, soaking wet in his pristine office. "It's about time you got yourself a better blazer," she said, and slipped the ring onto her finger. He laughed, a real, unburdened laugh, and pulled her into his arms. The fairy tale wasn't about a billionaire sweeping a poor girl off her feet. It was about two people who tore each other apart, and then, piece by piece, helped each other build something real.